All right, we're still scheduling college football games 12 and 13 and 14 years in advance. It makes no sense. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day with you. Here's our live Tuesday call-in show. So yesterday, actually on Super Bowl Sunday, I released our off-season live stream schedule. And yes, this is part of the off-season schedule. So as long as a Tuesday at noon Eastern time is beneficial for all of us, then we will continue this. Just wanted to check out some times, try out some times. I had mentioned the other day that the YouTube analytics say that 6 o'clock Eastern time is when most of you are on YouTube. So we set 6 o'clock Eastern time as a primary call-in show time, and also a couple times at noon Eastern time on Monday with Pigskin Pete on our college football coast to coast show, and today at noon Eastern time. Got a few people on the line to talk college football. The news of the day involves Florida and Notre Dame signing a series to play in 2031 and 32. If anybody here wants to think about what's going to be happening in 2031 and 32, you're not me. 2031 and 32. So we're looking at 10 to 11 years in advance. And college football series being signed for, hey, what we would expect to be a great series. Florida and Notre Dame, two of the primary brands in college football. But who knows what we're going to have at that point. And Brian Kelly and Dan Mullen, odds say, will not be on the sidelines, neither one of them, for that game, most likely. All right. So it brought to mind seeing those two brands and seeing those two teams and programs that are striving to reach that elite level, that which out of the two, Florida and Notre Dame, both facing unique and very different challenges based on their situations, based on the schedule, based on Florida's place in the SEC, which is both a benefit and a challenge, a detriment, a barrier to elite status, based on their head coaches, based on the talent acquisition. Which one will reach elite status? Florida has been the most recent of the two to be elite, unless you consider Notre Dame to be elite now. I don't. I think they're on a next level beyond, below that, based on what they've accomplished the last few years and reaching two college football playoffs, but being clearly not up to the task. While Florida, of course, under Urban Meyer, was the program in college football for about 3 to 4 years, and winning two national championships and coming that close to reaching a third BCS championship game before bowing to Nick Saban in Alabama in 2009, which of course ushered in the Alabama run. But between Florida and Notre Dame, and really anybody else who is going to be that next elite program, we get our first call of the day. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
The voice of college football, Mr. Mark Rogers. Hi, and how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, David. Great to hear from you. And as I was receiving the phone call, it did go through my mind, I got to say, that I would have laid a small, very small amount of money that it was you.
Okay. Well, I'm glad. I always try to get in. Well, first of all, I couldn't get in last night. I was went to the gym and worked out, and then ended up getting back, and your show was already over with. So I missed you last night, Mark, but I listened to the replay, and I have a few comments, and I'm going to get to Notre Dame and Florida here in a second. But I just want to kind of go over what you were talking about, like with the top tiers last night before we get to Notre Dame and Florida. First of all, let me just go ahead and rank the top five. And I think it's rather simple and basic when it comes to the tiers. Number one is Alabama. Number two, in my opinion, because they have two championships, is Clemson. And number three is Ohio State. Now, where we differ is I would put Oklahoma ahead of Georgia, because I think 4 playoff appearances versus 1 championship game appearance, I think that's a difference. And on top of that, I know they played, and I know Georgia beat them, but we all know that game was a flip of the coin game that could have gone either way. I just think that those 4 playoff appearances have to matter, Mark. So I would have Oklahoma ahead of Georgia right now. Please tell me where I'm going wrong.
Well, I don't think you're necessarily going wrong. It's not an opinion that I would say, okay, that's just flat out wrong versus I don't agree with it, but I still think it's a valid and credible stance to take. So there's a difference there between saying, an opinion's just not valid, is just so ridiculous, versus, yeah, I don't agree with that, but it's credible. It's of value. It makes sense. I think that Oklahoma has exceeded Georgia's progress in reaching a playoff based on situation. They're in a better situation. They're a more advantageous situation to get to a playoff than Georgia is. I'm not just taking playoff selections as being the end all be all. We can take that down a certain track. Is Michigan State higher than a number of other teams we could mention because they reached a playoff? Or is Washington better than Wisconsin because they reached a playoff?
Right. The only thing that I would say, and I get that Georgia is in a better conference, but just a couple of points. Number one, I do think that with Georgia recruiting in the top 2 or 3 every year, I just think over the last 4 or 5 years, I expect more than one playoff appearance. I'm sorry, I do. I think that, and I know they're in the same conference with Alabama. I get that. They ran into that LSU team last year. I understand where you're coming from. But, still this year, they had the number one they had the number one roster according to 24/7 Sports Composite. And on top of that, I think they've been right there in previous couple years. And I would say for Oklahoma to maintain the consistency, I know people are going to put down the Big 12, but to get there 4 times is still pretty solid, and with different quarterbacks. So I would give Oklahoma the slight edge, just a slight edge. That's where I'm coming from.
The other comparison I'm making is their ability to play with elite teams. Georgia has proven more consistently being able to play with or beat teams on their level versus what Oklahoma has shown us. So you're right. The Oklahoma-Georgia game, I give Georgia a slight edge just because they simply won the game. But I think you've heard me enough, and we've had enough discussions that I don't say a win's a win and a loss is a loss, and Georgia beat them, therefore they're better. That the evaluation of the game is that, like you say, it was a flip of a coin. It was a flip of a coin.
Right, that game could. Right. And I always think, by the way, no, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Oklahoma was playing with, and this is part of the talent evaluation, but they were playing with a quarterback that proved to be much better than the other quarterback. And, certainly was at the time.
You know what that game was?
Yep.
Right. You know what that game was? I think Georgia had the better roster, but Oklahoma had the better quarterback.
Yeah.
Overall, I think Georgia had more overall talent, but I think Oklahoma clearly, obviously, had the better quarterback. And that was probably Oklahoma's best chance. Because obviously that was really their only competitive playoff game.
Yeah. And so aside from that game, what I'm seeing is that Georgia has lost to Alabama 3 times since 2017, and 2 of the games were epic. And one was what I consider to be very competitive, even though a lot of people wouldn't because they'll just look at the final score. But I watched the 2 teams play in the field and saw, Georgia struggling with the top 50 quarterback in the country, maybe something in that range, maybe not even that good. So I haven't seen that out of Oklahoma. They made a furious comeback against Alabama in the 18 playoff, but were never really had a chance. So I think that score was deceiving. They got just gut punched in the first quarter and were never in the game. And of course, LSU just completely abused them. And, they lost to Clemson substantially, and then the Georgia game was the one time that they showed up and played well.
Right. Well, the one thing that I would say, and I posted this in the comments, Mark, and I have a friend of mine that's a big Georgia fan, and I said, Georgia, and I think I said this to Uncle Lou as well, Georgia needs to find that innovative offensive-minded coach. Kirby Smart needs to find what Ed Orgeron found in Joe Brady. And I know guys like that don't grow on trees, but they need to find an innovative offensive mind that a quarterback would want to play for and that could really develop a quarterback. for them to eventually get over the hump.
Sure.
That's just the missing piece there.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt
It is.
about it.
Yep. It is. And then all these other
uh,
things possibly go away. Everything that people talk about with they choke and they make bad in-game decisions, which I've picked on their in-game decisions too as well. But the quarterback, and not just the quarterback, but yeah, the right style of offense and an innovative play caller, Lane Kiffin type, would probably be the one thing that they need more than anything else. Yep.
Hey, to the Florida Notre Dame question, let me go there here real quick with you. Now, in my rankings, I would put Notre Dame ahead of Florida. Where are you at?
Yeah, as a program and as a current team, yes.
Okay. First of all, up until this year and Dan Mullen and his kookiness, I thought he had Florida heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
I really did. Up until like the last couple games, I would say.
Yeah.
They finally conquered Georgia. They finally got to Atlanta. They gave Alabama their closest game of the year. And then I think like something went wrong with those players in that bowl game and like in between that. I get the LSU loss was bad and throwing the shoe and that whole thing. But I just think that something with that bowl game and just not showing up and the way he handled it, I think your Florida people kind of see that too, wouldn't you say?
Well, I stated a number of times that Florida had the most both ends of the spectrum season of anybody in college football. They had higher highs and lower lows, relatively speaking. I'm not talking about they're the worst team in the country, lower lows, but relative to what we expect out of them. Because if you would have said at the beginning of the season, this team is going to beat Georgia head-to-head, and Georgia's going to be a top 10 team. They're going to win the Eastern Division, and they're going to face an Alabama team that's going to prove to be by far the best team in the country, and they're going to play them tougher than anybody else, including the two college football playoff opponents. Those are all pluses in Florida's category, that they took Alabama to the wire. They won the East. They beat Georgia. But Dan Mullen acted like a fool a number of times, made just very juvenile kind of decisions on how to act as a head coach and the CEO of a major program like that. They had the LSU game, which to me, that's a bad loss because LSU was down and clearly didn't play well most of the season. But from a talent perspective, that didn't surprise me. I made the comment several times that week that if LSU won that game, it wouldn't surprise me. Now, in the manner in which Florida lost the game, sabotaging their own season, yes, that just added to the buffoonery that Mullen started. And then, yes, the debacle of people I believe would have understood, just like with the North Carolina-Texas A&M situation with the Heels losing all the offensive firepower and Chasserod on defense, that there would have been an understanding if Florida would have went out there and accounted for themselves and would have given a strong effort with what they had, and even if they would have lost by 20 points, that it would have been understood, okay, we didn't get to see the real team here. They lost. It counts. But they just made it a mockery. And Dan Mullen's to be held accountable for that because he was the guy in charge and made the comments prior to the game to kind of set up the debacle that we were going to see and to make excuses for it.
Here's the thing. And I thought Mullen was a good hire when they made the hire for a few reasons. First of all, I think he's a pretty sharp offensive mind. Number two, which I think is very important in today's day and age of offensive football. Number two, he coached down there, so I thought he kind of knew the Florida program and the lay of the land and would be a good fit there because he had been there before. So I thought those two factors, I think, were good factors. He was familiar with the SEC and all of that. But I think that, you can get away with some of this buffoonery if you're winning. And I think he could be in for a very tough season this year, just for the simple fact they lost a fair amount of talent, and I don't know if they've got enough to replace it. And if they have a down year this year and really fall back to like a 7-5, even 8-4, I think that the knives could be out there. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I don't know where I made this comment, but it was very similar to what you just said, that with the personal losses that they're undergoing versus the schedule, I think it shapes up as a difficult season. Difficult meaning, like you just said, 8-4, most likely. Maybe they go 7-5. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost another game, went 7-5, especially since in the aftermath of what they accomplished last year, it's very much looking like an aberration. It's looking like, not that they're not a good team with a good program and recruiting decent talent, but in terms of staying toe-to-toe with Georgia, it looks like they put together the right quarterback with the right playmakers, with the right offense, that they were so high-powered just in that one facet of the game to stay with and supersede Georgia. And Georgia had the issues at quarterback that day, and Florida, just on the strength of being so prolific in one area of the game, passing offense, was an aberration.
Right. They just had the right quarterback and the right playmakers took advantage of it. I hear you. On to Notre Dame here real quick, Mark. Here's where I put Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame, and we've talked a little bit about this. First of all, I think they're a top 10 program. Probably somewhere in 6 to 10.
Yeah.
You know, and you can put them wherever you want within that area, and it really doesn't matter that much whether you want to put them 6, 7, 8, 9, wherever. That being said, the bottom line, I think it just comes back to, until Kelly, I've just not seen a Notre Dame team with the quarterback and the skilled players they need to win. Just period. And I don't think until they get the skilled players and the quarterbacks that really scare you, they're ever going to have a chance to win. They built the trenches well. They built the defense pretty well. But until they get the quarterback and skilled players, I just don't think it's ever going to matter. Is that just pretty much the bottom line, Mark?
It sure seems like it. It sure seems like it, just the way the game's played these days, that you need those guys, and they fortify themselves elsewhere. I don't know that they have a great defense, but I think they're good enough. That defense is good enough to win a national championship, and the offensive line certainly is. And they got the tight end possession whipped. But I don't know that they've shown us they've got Kyron Williams is a really good player, but maybe, you see a difference when Najee Harris gets the ball in his hands. And I understand there's not a whole lot of him around, but they need to complement the Chase Claypool type of receiver, the big body guy, with the burners. And I'm not talking about just the burner that is only good for that, because that's a different type of player. Back in the Alvin Harper days of the Dallas Cowboys, where he'd catch 30 passes a season and 10 of them were touchdowns. And no, but the Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith guy, Chris Olave, that's can take the top off the defense, but is just also a polished number one receiver.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing about today, Mark, is that you have to have, especially in today's brand of offensive football, if you don't have that, especially on the outside, you're really in trouble. And that might be another situation where, Kelly's modified his coaching staff in the past, and we were kind of talking about Georgia, is can he bring in an offensive coaching staff that can attract those type of recruits and develop those type of recruits? I think would be the bottom line going forward. I don't know if your Notre Dame people feel the same way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that we've really hit it from that angle, that they can't bring in those type of talents because of the offensive staff. I would think that they wouldn't have an issue bringing in offensive coaching personnel that's viewed as being first rate.
Okay. Well, sometimes usually, you have to have that coaching staff in place to get the recruits, number one, and then, of course, to develop them. That was just my line of thinking there. But, yeah, I think that they're in that solid program, but again, until they up that level, I just can't see them getting over the top. So, bottom line for me, I would put Notre Dame ahead of Florida right now, and I think Florida, this is going to be an interesting year or two with Mullen, because I think this bottom line, this next year, maybe two, determines his future.
Yeah, And I think for both of us, it sounds like that doesn't necessarily mean that Notre Dame would have beaten Florida on the field in 2020. It means that we have more confidence in what Notre Dame is going forward based on their past 3 to 4 years versus Florida being a roller coaster, possibly, and just having the right group of players, especially on offense in the passing game for one season. And yeah, we could see a drop off, and I'm expecting a drop off.
Right. Yeah. One last thing with Notre Dame. Do you think Kelly stays there long term, Mark, or do you have an opinion on that one?
I do think he stays there long term. Yeah, I don't know. I think that, Notre Dame, even if he was not succeeding to this degree, is not the type of university that just acts as coaches. You have to be marginal for a while, a la Ty Willingham, Charlie Weiss, Bob Davie, a while to get the axe. And he's, of course, nowhere close to that. They're actually happy and ecstatic with what he's accomplishing. And I don't know what his pro aspirations are, but where else is he going to go in college football? He's reached, I may step on some toes by saying this, but I don't think there's anywhere above him. There's no place to go above Notre Dame.
Sure.
It's a job.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that. I'd heard about those pro aspirations, but, who knows how that works out.
Exactly.
All right, Mark, as always, a pleasure, my friend. Have a good one.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Guy, David Greenshield, with a take on Notre Dame and Florida. The reason I threw this topic out there was that Notre Dame and Florida have signed a series to play in 2031 and 32. And I'm going to answer the question on the screen because it's a favorite of mine. Yes, the Florida Gators, of course, play Florida State each and every year. So that's their big game, their annual rivalry game with Florida State. So that's always played, of course, in the state of Florida. Florida, other than that, will sometimes play another a difficult out-of-conference game. And that's been Miami in recent years. That's been Michigan, but they either play at a neutral site or they play in the state of Florida, of course, if they're playing Miami. So CB, just to correct your question, where you say crazy trivia, when was the last time Florida played a non-conference top 25 opponent in the regular season? So you can wipe out top 25 opponent. It's any opponent in the regular season outside the state of Florida. So they played Michigan outside the state of Florida just a couple of years ago. So how you want to state there is that they played on the road. They haven't played on the road. Florida has not played a true road game outside the state of Florida since 1991, playing Syracuse at the Carrier Dome. All right. Hey, who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Michael. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Michael. What's going on?
Not much, just waiting for lunch and stuff. Okay. Hey, I got a question. I just seen this earlier, and I remember this used to happen quite a bit in the 80s and stuff like that, where you get a lot of these non-conference, matchups and stuff like that. Why did it take so long? And yeah, during like the maybe early 90s, why did it take so long for these schools to say, hey, let's start playing each other again? And stuff like that. Even though you had some throughout and stuff like that, it seemed like you're getting a lot more of it now like you did back in the 80s and 90s.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me try to follow this. We're not getting as good a non-conference games as we did in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, I mean, you got Notre Dame and Florida doing a home and home in 10 years and stuff like that. I was just looking at some of the future schedules through FBS schedules and stuff like that, and I see you get a lot of big non-conference matchups coming up the next few years. I mean, you had some, but to me, it was like more predominant like in the 80s and 90s. And then I wonder why it fell out for a while and then started to pick back up for it.
Well, I can't really confirm that. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I would have to go through the schedules. I don't know. I understand that you're just going off memory, but I don't think that we can necessarily say that the schedules now aren't as challenging as they were in the 80s and 90s out of conference.
Okay. I was wondering,
I would need to see some proof of
go
that.
ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, Michael.
You
I would
what?
just need to see some proof of that because my recollection is that most of the big teams in the 80s and 90s took the same approach as they do now. They go out and schedule one difficult non-conference opponent, typically. Some of them would schedule two, and that's pretty much what we've got going right now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. But it seemed like there's times maybe like you get one, but I mean, it seemed like is it not that you might maybe see two big time matchups a year with some teams that's with non-conference? It's just like with Purdue this year. I mean, you got like Notre Dame, and you got Oregon State. Even though Oregon State kind of going to be decent this year, I'm not really sure yet. So it seems like, how can I put this in words to where you can understand? I'm actually a lot of words here. I guess it's more prevalent now that there's some teams trying to bulk up their schedule by maybe just doing Power 5 conference not scheduled now.
See, I tend to think that we have maybe a few more big matchups, Power 5 matchups today than we did 25, 30 years ago because they're playing more games. They're playing one more game. Like teams were playing 11-game schedules up until about 2005, and now they're playing 12-game regular seasons, so they've got one more slot to fill with a decent team.
Mm-hmm. No, man, I was just wondering stuff like that. All right, I know it's lunch, and you got a lot of other colors and stuff like that. I just wanted to chime in. Thank you much, Mark.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right. Yep.
So what Michael is saying is that he believes that the schedules in the 80s and 90s, non-conference schedules, were tougher and more difficult and had more intriguing big-time matchups than they do now. I can't refute that. I can't confirm it. I don't know off the top of my head. We'd have to research it. We'd have to go year by year, team by team, and then define what a top 25 matchup, and then determine if we're seeing more of those today than we were 25, 30 years ago. I think it's roughly the same. Everybody's playing an 8 or 9 game conference season, and they're playing 2 or 3 non-conference games or 4 non-conference games. And typically, if you look across the board, everybody's scheduling one difficult opponent. Pretty much. Some are going to 2. We see that with USC, and sometimes with Stanford, and some other teams, especially there in the ACC and the SEC, where they have those automatic matchups. South Carolina, Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, where if they choose to play somebody else, like Florida often does, and Florida State go and play somebody else, then they're playing 2 difficult opponents because they have the one for sure. And when I say difficult, I mean just Power 5, whether they're good that year or not. Florida State, year before last, they had the Florida game, and then they also played Boise State, and then there was somebody else in there. Maybe it was who they were supposed to play this year. Maybe it was Florida State. It was Florida State. Actually, we didn't see it come to fruition and see it played out. But Florida State this year was going to be playing, meaning in 2020, was going to be playing Notre Dame, Florida, and Boise State out of conference. That's pretty serious. Georgia's got some out-of-conference schedules that if they hold up, they're going to see some combination of Texas, Clemson, and Ohio State. 2 of those teams in one season. Ohio State does that coming up here pretty soon with like a Notre Dame, Washington, or Notre Dame, Texas. 2 of those difficult opponents. Alabama or USC would have had that this year with Alabama and Notre Dame. So keep in mind that we are on a Patreon. So for about 17 cents a day, it's about $5 per month. You can join us on Patreon for exclusive live streams. You missed our prop bet that won, cashed in big, courtesy Steve Merrill, Pro Sports Info. He had an over-under on the sacks, and his analytics had shown that there would be more sacks than what the over-under presented, and he was correct. Also, I'm 30-12 against the spread in the Super Bowl. Yay. I hated to get this one right, though. Took Tampa Bay in the 3. Also took Tampa Bay straight up. So I'm 30-12 money line and 30-12 against the spread in the Super Bowl. Our scheduling fix. We've started our series to much acclaim. We released our first one this morning, scheduling fix for the ACC. So please check that out. Let us know what you think of our scheduling format for the ACC and how it should be conducted to be fair and equitable and produce a credible champion. So before we fix the playoff, we've got to fix the schedule. Okay? To properly evaluate the teams to determine the playoff, we've got to fix the scheduling first. And so that's what we're doing. We've got the ACC released today. I believe Wednesday's going to be the SEC, then the Big Ten, and the Pac-12. Then, of course, the Big 12, they all play each other. Next, we're going to address non-conference scheduling. Then we're going to address the playoff. So look out for those series. Again, scheduling. Then the non-conference scheduling. After we get done with all the conferences, then we're going to fix non-conference scheduling. Then we're going to approach the playoff. Will Saban ever retire? That's what the SEC is asking. That's what college football is asking, Joel. Michael, letting everyone know that you should smash the like button. So 2 things I ask of you. There's a zillion ways you can help support the channel, but 2 items I ask of you. Number 1, smash the like button. If you're here for the content, you enjoy the discussion, the debate, analysis, and also the content we provide, then just hit the like button. It takes, 1.5 seconds, something like that, right on the phone. There you go. The other one would be share the videos on social media. So think of it this way. If you enjoy the content and you're on Twitter and Facebook and these other platforms, then I would think that other people, you would want to share that with other people. Share the goodness with other people. So share the content on social media. That helps us build the channel. I guarantee that at least 95% of the people that you're connected with on Facebook and Twitter have no idea that we're here. So the reason or the way that they will find out that we're here is for you to share the videos and let us know. Let them know that we're here. Jordan's way ahead of it. He's already got it marked on his calendars for 20, 30, and 32, or whatever it is, 20, 30, and 31. 31, 32, Florida. Notre Dame's on the calendar. Yes, we're all excited. Notre Dame in Florida. Yeah. Joel, I don't understand why Texas would get rid of the Longhorn Network in favor of the Big 12 network, because they've got that advantage over the rest of the conference. Now, if they want to be, if they want to be benevolent to the rest of the conference, then that would be a decision they would want to make. But looking out for their own interests, they're in a good position where they are right now. The Rod Farba extending what I was saying about Ohio State schedules coming up. We have Texas and Washington in 25, Texas and BC in 26, 27 is Ohio State plays Alabama, then BC. So it's that Texas-Washington year that I was looking for there. Joel, yeah, we're not looking for the aberrations there, but you're right. Bobby Bowden's Florida State teams just played killer non-conference schedules in the 80s when they were trying to get, not so much in the 90s because they became a big shot, but in the early 80s. Well, first of all, they were an independent. So you got to understand, they were like a Notre Dame was then. So they had to fill up their schedule. So that's part of it too. Miami and Florida State and Boston College and Penn State and Maryland and Syracuse and others were independents. We had a ton of independents. South Carolina was an independent back then. So there were tons of independent teams, and they had to fill up the whole schedule. So, of course, they play each other. They play a lot of each other, and that's kind of what formed the Big East. West Virginia independent, Pitt independent. Wow, there were so many independent teams back up until the Big East formed. And some of them joined other conferences, South Carolina, the SEC. But the Big East pretty much swallowed up all the independents because most of them were in the East. They were all in the East, actually, besides BYU. And BYU was in the WAC, actually. BYU was in the WAC at the time. But, yeah, Florida State would play a killer schedule because they wanted to get recognized and known, and they knew that they had something going, something good with all the talent acquisition in Florida. So they started to load up on Notre Dame and Ohio State and Nebraska and others, non-conference, and they would travel. Those were not home-and-home series. Florida State would travel to all those destinations. The Rod Favre, glad you brought it up. I tweeted this out earlier. Rest in peace, Marty Schottenheimer. Tremendous football coach, Cleveland Browns, Kansas City Chiefs, San Diego Chargers, Washington Redskins. But beyond that, by all indications, and I don't know the man to make this validation a personal one, but by all indications of everything I've heard, that we've all heard from people that did know him, that he was an even greater individual, greater man than he was a coach. All right. All right, folks, I guess we're finished with the phone calls. We've got 23 on the line. I'm going to be here every Tuesday at noon Eastern time. Every Tuesday at noon Eastern time to take your calls on college football. We'll most likely present a topic that doesn't necessarily have to be what we talk about, but just to get the conversation started. I'm going to be back here at 6 o'clock Eastern time tonight to take your calls on college football. We will see you then, 6 o'clock tonight. Actually, I got to remember my own schedule that I put out on Super Bowl Sunday. 6 o'clock tonight is on the Ohio State channel to talk Buckeyes. So we'll do that at 6 o'clock tonight. See you then.